communities. I think, yeah, it would be great for us to first go around and quickly share the staff and the TA providers that are on call and will be presenting today. So I'm Jess, I'm a program associate for TCC, and I help with technical assistance, communications, and outreach. And I'll pass it to Jerry.
Hey everybody, this is Jerry Rivero with the Senior Programs Analyst with the Transformative Climate Communities. Thanks for joining us today. Tossing it over to Nicole Cartwright at DOC, who's the next on my screen.
Good afternoon, everyone. Nicole Cartwright with the Department of Conservation. I am on the TCC team, and thanks for being here today. I'll pass it to Riley, or Julia maybe.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. Hi, everyone. My name is Julia. I'm also on the DOC team for the TCC staff. I am a grant manager. I think we have one more person on TCC staff. Yeah, Anna Jane. I'll pass it to you.
Hey y'all, good afternoon. My name is Anna Jane Jones, and I am TCC staff with the Strategic Growth Council. And I will pass it over to some of our TA providers to provide their intro. Riley, maybe you could start.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Riley O'Brien. I am a senior analyst with Estolano Advisors and the project manager for the state-funded third-party technical assistance team for TCC. I'll pass it over to my colleague, Anna.
Thanks, Riley. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anna Cuevas Flores, and I'm an associate at Estolano Advisors and also one of the lead TA providers. And with that, I'll pass it over to Clancy.
Hi, all. I'm Clancy Taylor with the California Coalition for Rural Housing. We are one of the TA providers for TCC, focusing on rural housing and tribal communities. So I'll pass it back to Jerry.
Great. Thank you all. Thanks for the intros. Great. Folks are still trickling in, getting folks in. So this is great. Good timing here. So yeah, welcome one and all. Welcome everybody to this workshop. But before we begin, I just wanted to note and acknowledge, the challenges that we're facing across the state. With the recent rains and flooding, particularly in rural communities. We hope that folks are safe and sheltered and staying safe in these next couple of days. So yeah, just also noting how important the work that you all are doing and we're trying to do to bridge the gaps, right, towards climate and environmental justice in rural frontline communities. So wanted to acknowledge that before we started. With that, we'll get this presentation started. We will go to Jess, who has a general synopsis of folks that are in the room.
Thanks, Jerry, and thanks for that acknowledgement. Yes, so just want to frame who's in the room with us. So this is all pulled from the registration. So when asked what grant type will you apply for, a lot of folks are unsure, but many are also looking at planning grants. And so hopefully that this presentation will give you all more clarity on the differences between the grants and which one is best for your community and your community needs. It also looks like many of y'all are somewhat familiar or unfamiliar with the TCC application, which is again perfectly okay. I recognize some of y'all, this may be your first time even hearing about TCC. And when asked what type of organizations and entities do you all represent, many of you all come from nonprofit backgrounds and county government backgrounds. So this is just a way to frame who's in the room, and hopefully you all are also able to introduce yourselves in the chat and possibly even find collaboration opportunities.
Great, thanks, Jess. Yeah, so just a few housekeeping items before we start here with the presentation. Letting folks know that the session will be recorded and posted via the TCC website. We will also be taking questions in the chat. Before I go there, if you have any tech issues, feel free to drop them in the chat. We have staff monitoring the chat on the back end. And in that monitoring, we'll also be answering questions. So feel free, if questions come up and you feel inspired to ask a question during the presentation, go ahead and drop it in the chat. We'll try to get to it as quickly as we can. And then on that note, we will also be recording the chat and then sending that out with an FAQ resource stock for folks. And with that said, we'll go into the agenda for today. So we will be discussing the TCC program overview with goals and principles. We will be discussing deadlines for the application process. TA provider, as you have heard, is on this call and will also present an overview of the application provided for round 5. And then we have a recent awardee from the County of San Diego here, who will be presenting on their experiences during a little bit about the Planning Grant Award. And we'll be talking to their experiences applying as a disadvantaged unincorporated community, or a DUC, as we will say. So yeah, and then I think we will be having breakout sessions towards the end. So yeah, well, there will be opportunity for question and answers throughout. Great. So with that, we'll go on to the next slide here, which talks to the California Strategic Growth Council. So the California Strategic Growth Council is a cabinet level committee tasked with coordinating state agency activities aimed at supporting the planning and development of sustainable communities across the state. The mission of the council is to coordinate and work collaboratively with public agencies, communities, and stakeholders to achieve sustainability, equity, economic prosperity, and quality of life for all Californians. Furthermore, the Strategic Growth Council is committed to achieving racial equity in which all people of California can live in healthy, thriving, and resilient communities, regardless of race. So with that, we'll go on to the next slide and again, give you a brief background and overview of the TCC program and goals. So next slide, the TCC program was created through legislation in 2016 to fund community-led climate resilient development and infrastructure plans that provide multiple benefits. I'm going to stress that community-led part, as we'll see and we'll talk to more in our examples and in the work. The program's vision for transformation is centered on a place-based approach with a focus on funding neighborhood plans in the most disadvantaged communities in California. We also recognize that the term disadvantage overlooks the many assets and existing efforts in communities. And we will be using the term from the California Environmental Protection Agency that defines disadvantaged communities as census tracts with high pollution and socioeconomic burdens. Next slide, please. So SGC administers the Transformative Climate Communities program in partnership with the California Department of Conservation, who we met on this, is on this call and you have met. TCC funds community-driven proposals and is structured to provide existing residents and stakeholders with the tools and the resources to drive change. TCC makes significant investments to support the development of multiple integrated climate strategies and projects carried out through strong partnerships at the local level and with the state. So total investments to date are $326 million across 30 communities. And so far, there's a reduction of 261,000 metric tons of greenhouse gases. Next slide. So the available grants for round 5 are here on this slide. Historically, TCC has funded planning grants and implementation grants. New to round 5 are the project development grants highlighted there in orange, dark orange. So we'll talk to these a little bit more, but just a general rundown. There for planning grants, there will be 3 awards of up to $300,000 each for this round. These support planning activities, again, in disadvantaged communities. They could be used to prepare communities for future TCC grants or other resilient implementation funding. These are in a 2-year grant term with the option to extend on a case-by-case basis. As far as project development grants, again, excited to announce these. These are new funds available in this round for TCC. There will be multiple awards here of up to $5 million each. These are prioritized in disadvantaged unincorporated communities. These follow a 2-year grant term as well. And then we have implementation grants, which, as we will see in the next slide, are more holistic and in nature. And there are 3 awards for $29.5 million each for this round. And then these will fund project proposals, as we'll talk to later, that include multiple coordinated projects aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions and achieving community benefit. These follow a 5-year grant term with a 1 year of performance and outcome evaluation. Next slide, please. Yeah, so here we see examples of eligible activities. Really, I want to highlight the differences between the planning and project development grants. So project development grants really fund, these are examples, right, of eligible activities. Feasibility studies, environmental infrastructure, pre-development projects, community engagement, capacity building, such as funding new and critical positions for the work. Really, this is meant to be the gap between planning and implementation grants. So folks who may not necessarily be ready for an implementation grant, but are beyond the scope of maybe a planning grant, this may be your wheelhouse here, the project development grant. Again, we'll talk to these a little bit further in the presentation. The next slide we have here are the implementation grant awardees to date. We have rounds 1 through 4 here depicted in this map and the award amounts. And then the next slide shows the planning grants awarded to date. Again, rounds 1 through 4. We will note that in the last round 4, we expanded eligibility to disadvantaged unincorporated communities. We're going to start using ducks. I think it's easier to say the ducks and tribal communities. And you can see here, I don't know if it's easy to see on your screen, but it's a purplish color here for round 4 grantees. Happy to announce that the Kairook tribes, Hoopa Valley, Waiute tribes, and the Chicken Ranch Rancheria tribes were awarded in this past round, as well as Monterey County, Tulare County, and San Diego County, who will be speaking to their application process a little bit later. Cool. With that, I think I'll pass it on to Julia, who will be speaking to the TCC program and principles. Julia, on to you.
Yes, thank you, Jerry. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the workshop. My name is Julia, and I am with the Department of Conservation as a grant manager. Today, you're going to be getting a lot of detailed information regarding the TCC program application process. The application process can be complicated and daunting, and we're going to do our best to orient you to the requirements and resources that we have available. But before we do that, we're going to pull back a little bit and talk about the TCC program as a whole and the principles of the program. We want to ensure that we have a strong foundation and goal in mind when moving through the application process. So for this portion of the presentation, we will have a majority focus on implementation grants. However, most of the visioning and core concepts can be shared with the planning grants and project development grants. I also would like to note all of this information can be found in the round 5 guidelines as well in more detail. We'll go to the next slide, please. Okay, so now that we've introduced the legislation and the TCC program overview, we will talk about the implementation of these grants. The program focuses on bringing together multiple community partnerships and projects in order to reach the overarching goal of sustainable investment and transformative planning. To accomplish these goals, the first step is to create and establish a community vision and a collaborative structure involving residents, leaders, and community-based organizations. Next slide, please. Thank you. Prior to and during the application process, lead and co-applicants will want to bring together and collaborate with residents, community leaders, and community-based organizations or local government agencies in order to start the discussion about a community vision of transformation. This vision will guide to inform the rest of the program, how projects are selected, and how the work is conducted through the life of the grant. At the same time, these collaborative structures will become more formalized, and the relationships developed through the visioning process will start to develop more formal structures. So a strong collaborative structure will be the guiding entity to inform decision-making processes throughout the grant, uniting different stakeholders and building upon that guiding vision and the principles of the grant. So if we click, there's a photo we have for you all. So this is a photo of Round 3 implementation grant in Oakland, showing some of the team that created the vision and also makes up the collaborative stakeholder structure for the grant. So once this vision and collaborative structure are created, the next step will be identifying the projects that you will be completing during the implementation of the grant, which we have on the next slide. Okay, so in order to provide flexibility, TCC offers a menu of options for projects under different strategies to meet specific needs of your community. There are a wide range of project types that are grouped under strategies, which are shown on this slide here. Each of these strategies have projects you can select with fundable elements under the grant. For example, if your community has expressed a desire for increased access to fresh local grown foods during the visioning process, this would fall under the health and well-being strategy. In the strategy, you will find fundable projects such as community gardens or urban agriculture projects. And then each of these strategies on the screen is similarly structured and found in the TCC Round 5 guidelines. One thing here, applicants do not need to include projects from every strategy. You will select which strategies fit best for your community's needs and move your vision forward. Another note, these will be projects you will be implementing in the TCC grant. So we want to encourage you to be creative and think outside the box when selecting projects. Move to the next slide. So here are a few additional project strategies. We have renewable energy independence, rurally appropriate affordable housing, transit access and active transportation, and then health and well-being. So in initial consultations, it was indicated that several of these TCC funded project types were of interest of unincorporated and rural communities. And then we'll move to the next slide. So in addition to the TCC program framework, the following program policy priorities will be evaluated during the application process, which includes access to basic infrastructure, regional services, and job centers. Applicants must demonstrate that TCC investment will provide long-term benefits to the community and that residents in the proposed TCC project area have existing access or have developed plans and secured support or funding to implement basic environmental infrastructure, such as water supply, wastewater services, and transit connectivity to regional service hubs or job centers. We also recognize the lack of this infrastructure is an existing barrier in many communities. So TCC staff and technical assistance providers will work with potential applicants during the pre-proposal phase to help make connections to other funding programs or resources that may help them meet the minimum requirements. Applicants can request up to 10% of the requested funds to support projects connecting residents to basic infrastructure or environmental infrastructure projects, including water, wastewater, waste disposal, and pollution control infrastructure. We'll move to the next slide. Okay, so additional requirements specific to implementation grants include the 6 transformative elements. These elements are meant to pull together each of the selected project types and make sure the projects work cohesively to achieve the goal of transformation within the community. Community engagement is to be incorporated throughout every project to ensure all stakeholders, residents are included during the application process and throughout the grant lifetime. The goal is to ensure residents create lasting relationships with decision makers so that these investments are sustained after the completion of the grant term. Next, we have workforce development. This will be incorporated within different projects to ensure residents have economic benefits, including access to training and educational opportunities to build new skills, provide employment opportunities for residents. And then last, we have displacement avoidance, and this provides opportunities for this ensures that residents currently living in the community benefit from the investments of the projects. And then we'll move to the next slide. So the last 3 additional transformative elements required for implementation grants include climate adaptation and resilience, data collection and indicator tracking, and leverage funding. Climate adaptation and resilience is to be considered throughout all projects and plans to address climate change related impacts and exposure for vulnerable populations. Each of the implementation grants will be required to track data. This will be funded, and this is usually done by a third-party evaluator to help monitor the success of the grant and establish opportunities for improvement. And then last, the leverage requirement is specific to implementation grants. This requires 50% of the total grant award to be matched by leverage funds, and more details regarding this can also be found in the grant guidelines. We'll move to the next slide. So a little bit more on leverage funds. They may come from a variety of sources such as federal, state, local, private, public, and nonprofit entities. For additional information about eligible funding sources, you can refer to Appendix C of the Round 5 guidelines. In terms of implementation grants, applicants must ensure secured leverage funding, including a commitment to the project area and timeline for funding. The funding must be integrated into the projects and strategies and incorporated in the community vision. A quick note, planning grants do not require leverage funding and oftentimes are used to pursue additional leverage funding options. So for example, a planning grant could be used to conduct community workshops and go through the visioning process and identify potential community projects. And that work could then be used to apply for the TCC implementation grant or other grant sources. All right, and then we'll go to the next slide. So we touched on the vision, project framework, transformative elements, and now I will touch on the key features of the TCC projects that run through all the different elements of the program. So right here, we have some of these key features that should be integrated in part of each element of the application. The application should be place-based and accessible to residents of the neighborhood who are coming together to shape elements of the application and telling you what their vision for transformation is. Bringing so many different groups together often allows you to create an integrated suite of projects that help build each other up and share connections and resources. Another way that integration occurs is through the catalytic partnerships that are achieved through bringing people together, funding activities together, and sharing resources. Finally, we see that these TCC investments are catalytic investments in the community. So we often see that as a result of their involvement with TCC, organizations are able to build their capacity, reach out for additional grant funds from other sources, and really multiply the effect of these grant funds within their community. So now we're wrapping up this section. We've discussed the vision and key features of the TCC projects. So we will want to keep all this in mind during the rest of the presentation in coming months through the application process. So now I'll pass it off to Jess for the application overview and timeline.
Thank you, Julie. I really appreciate that. I'd also want to note that for leverage funding, it's not required for project development grants. And then so for this next section, we're going to cover the application overview, key components, timeline, and then hear from our technical assistance providers. So who is eligible to apply? For all grant types, applications must include a minimum of 2 co-applicants, including a public agency as a co-applicant, and this includes tribal governments. As described before, a core component of the program is the collaborative stakeholder structure. So a range of entities are available or are eligible, but no single entity on their own will be competitive. Eligible applicants include, but are not limited to, the ones on this slide. And the lead applicant must be the one that demonstrates both sufficient financial and administrative capacity to administer the grant. This slide describes the project and planning area requirements for disadvantaged and unincorporated communities. So the eligibility criteria for unincorporated communities, it differs slightly from criteria for tribal and incorporated areas. For implementation grant applicants, the project area can be up to 10 square miles continuously, and then for DEC applicants in rural areas, that 10 square miles is the limit. However, if you are a DEC applicant in an urban area, the project area must be up to 5 square miles. And in order to address the lack of data representation in these communities, we are accepting 4 methods to determine eligibility in unincorporated areas. A community only needs to meet any one of these 4 criteria. So the first is being located within the top 25% of disadvantaged census tracts per Cal EnviroScreen and be designated as a disadvantaged unincorporated community by the local agency formation commission. Second, the project or planning area is in an eligible location per the TCC mapping tool, which Jerry will touch on after this slide. And third, the project area is within the planning area of a previous TCC planning grant. And the final option is to self-identify as a disadvantaged unincorporated community and justify that designation with local data that identifies population characteristics and density at a neighborhood level. The other 49% of the project area can be the above criteria that I just listed or be in a low-income community per AB 1550. And I will toss it back to Jerry, who will go over the TCC mapping tool and how we use it for the application.
Cool, thanks, Jess. Yeah, we just have a resource here. I dropped in the chat the TCC mapping tool. Yes, you could Cal EnviroScreen 3.0 and 4.0. To Christine's question, drop that in the chat. That's the tool that you'll be using to identify your potential project area. This screenshot shows the resource for folks if interested in understanding kind of the layers and what data layers were used as we've expanded the work into ducks and tribal communities. Also, as you can see here with the numbers 4 and 5 there on that screen, included California Hard to Count Index and then California tribal land layers to help identify potential project areas in these spaces. Also dropping that story map into the chat for folks. Also noting that as a resource on the website, we have a 13-minute video tutorial, which you can scan to that shows how to gives a useful walkthrough on the tool and how to use the tool. Great. Next slide, please. All right, so just to give a summary on the key changes in round 5, particular to disadvantaged unincorporated communities. As mentioned earlier, ducks will be prioritized with these newly minted project development grants. And then for the project area eligibility, clarifying that first dot point there that, as Jess mentioned earlier, that project area cap size is up to 10 square miles for rural areas. But does not apply to unincorporated urbanized areas, which should still adhere to the 5 square mile project area. Other changes are some flexibility on the types of local data that can be used to establish project area eligibility. We understand that there are challenges with data in rural communities, so accepting different types of local data. Encourage y'all to look at the guidelines for the examples of what that may look like, and also to work with the application TA providers to help guide those conversations of what that may look like. Also, GHG scoring changes. We're now ducks, tribes, and rural communities will be evaluated separately from urban communities for half of the 20 GHG emission points. And then eligible project costs will now allow ducts to construct on natural and working lands if there are no alternatives available. Next slide is just a reminder of the grants we've been talking about. Project planning, project development, and implementation grants. Just to kind of rehash that. And then the following slide points to the different components in these different grant types. So next slide, please. With implementation grant clearly requiring more support and more work and more documentation, as you can see here by the X marks in these boxes, followed then by project development grants and then planning grants in order. Next slide. We'll talk to TCC policy priorities in this slide. So outlined here are program policy priorities that TCC has, and these will impact the eligibility and evaluation. Two of these, well, 2 and potentially 3 of these are required, and then some will involve incentive points. So the top row there first one required is applicants must demonstrate that TCC proposals are consistent with all relevant land use plans, including climate action plans, zoning, building density requirements, design guidelines, and applicable goals and policies and programs. This consistency is demonstrated by a submittal of a letter from the local jurisdiction's planning department or public works department describing the proposed TCC project's consistency with relevant plans. Also required is that applicants must demonstrate that residents in the proposed TCC project area have existing access or develop plans for basic water supply and wastewater services, as well as transit connectivity to regional service hubs and major job centers through affordable clean transportation projects. Applicants can allocate up to 10% of TCC grant funds towards meeting the water and wastewater requirement and can meet the other requirements through TCC funded projects. Again, the TA providers will support applicants in meeting these requirements through their proposed projects. If applicable, applicants from cities with planned high-speed rail stations along the Silicon Valley to Central Valley line must include in the TCC project area multimodal connectivity to high-speed rail. And if there are any proposed affordable and mixed income housing, its connectivity and accessibility to high-speed rail stations in the area. The 2 additional policy incentives include pro-housing and air pollution reduction and mitigation, which can earn applicants an additional 5 points each. TCC will provide incentives to applicants that propose actions or include existing meaningful efforts to reduce localized point sources of pollution in their TCC project areas and jurisdictions. And then we are also required by legislation to provide incentive points to applicants in jurisdictions that receive the Department of Housing and Community Development's pro-housing designation, which incentivizes policies that would facilitate sustainable housing production and the reduction of vehicle miles traveled. Tribal communities will automatically get full pro-housing incentive points, and the Department of Housing and Community Development's pro-housing designation can earn any jurisdiction these points. Additionally, we're noting that there are example policies for both incentives listed in the guidelines appendices, which applicants can earn in these points. So with that, and speaking of points, we'll go to scoring criteria. I think, Jess, that's you.
Yes, thanks, Jerry. And yes, I encourage you all to keep asking questions in the chat. We have some designated staff who are responding. So onto scoring criteria. So each application will be evaluated based on its vision and objectives, demonstrated capacity, and transformative elements. We're looking for a few things. So does the proposal align with TCC objectives, like the ones we covered in the beginning of this presentation? Does it comprehensively describe how it aligns with community needs? Are the partnerships diverse and strong? And does the lead applicant demonstrate the capacity to implement the proposal within the designated time and within budget, amongst a few other things? For the project development grant, as mentioned, DUC applicants are prioritized for this grant and have the most priority. And the full application thresholds and scoring criteria are listed in the round 5 guidelines. And there's also a checklist to guide you on those program threshold requirements. And then I will go over the TCC application timeline. So some things that have already passed are the draft guidelines, which some of you all have provided public comment on. Sorry, this is the second workshop of the day. And then these guidelines were adopted by the Strategic Growth Council in February, and on March 8th, we released the NOFA and application materials, marking it as the beginning of the application cycle. I'd also like to note that we did have to re-upload the application materials, and so if you were using any old ones, please make sure that you're using the right ones that were uploaded on March 16th. Starting on March 14th and occurring every Tuesday, we have TCC office hours from 2 to 4 p.m. I will send a follow-up email, so it will have all the details on how to access those office hours. Yesterday and today, we are doing those online application workshops. March 31st, which is next week, is the first big due date for this application cycle, which is the application initiation form is due for implementation grant applicants. So the application initiation form is designed to, one, collect interest and contact information so we can create the application submission folders, and then two, connect eligible applicants to technical assistance providers. For applicants in disadvantaged unincorporated communities, I also want to note that we can provide, or the TA will be provided not only for implementation grants, but also planning and project development grant applicants or applications. And so the first deadline for implementation grant applicants is at March 31st. On May 1st, implementation grant applicants will also submit a pre-proposal, and this will give the TA providers as well as SGC we will assess if applicants are on track to meet the threshold requirements by the application deadline, and also identify areas where additional support may be needed. The pre-proposal will not influence application evaluation. And then July 3rd is the due date for the application initiation form for planning and project development grant applicants. August 1st is the final application submission deadline. And then in December, we will be recommending awards to the council, and they will be adopting them. And I'd also like to note that DUC applicants are able to ask for an extension on those the application initiation form deadlines by emailing TCC. The application initiation form, again, is required for all applicants, and it is not a commitment to apply. So if you're thinking of applying, please fill it out. And then I will pass it over to our technical assistance providers who will go over what services they can provide and the timeline.
Thanks, Jess, and good afternoon, everyone. If you came in a little bit after 1, I can reintroduce myself. My name is Riley O'Brien. I'm with Estolano Advisors, and I'm the project manager for the state-funded third-party technical assistance team. So moving on to the next slide, I can provide an introduction to the technical assistance process. So if you are interested in applying for an implementation grant, you are required to work with our team, and the technical assistance team can provide various services, and those include things like assessing the readiness of your proposal, helping to guide, brainstorm, outline, and review your narrative. We can do the same sort of brainstorming and review of your work plan and budget. We can also help guide partnership development. So if you are, for example, with a public agency looking for local community organizations to partner with, or vice versa, we can help point you in the right direction to do so. And crucially, for the implementation grant specifically, our team will help all implementation grant applicants describe greenhouse, or quantify rather, their greenhouse gas emission reduction potential of their projects. So I'll chat a bit more about that in a few moments, but the key thing to remember here is that all implementation grant applicants must complete the application initiation form by next Friday, March 31st. Those of you from unincorporated communities, you can request more time by emailing the TCC email address, but we do encourage you to fill out that application initiation form as soon as possible, and by next Friday if possible, so that you can connect with our team and start the technical assistance process. Moving on to the next slide. We do also offer technical assistance to some planning and project development grant applicants, but you will need to demonstrate that you are from a tribal or unincorporated community to work with our team on those grant types. So if you're from a small city, an incorporated city, even in a rural area, you are not eligible for technical assistance for the planning or project development grant types, but you would still be eligible for implementation grant technical assistance. And those technical assistance services are largely the same. We can help assess the readiness of your proposed activities. We can help guide and review and proofread your narrative, your budget, work plan, and so on. We can help suggest avenues for partnership development. And for both grant types, or rather all three grant types, our team does not have capacity to do full grant writing services. So we're not able to, actually draft the narratives for you, but we are able to help guide and brainstorm and review, as I've mentioned. And there is a later deadline for the application initiation form for those two other grant types, the planning and project development grant. Those can be, the application initiation form for those grant types should be completed by July 3rd if possible. Although again, tribal and unincorporated communities can request more time if necessary by emailing TCC. And if we move on to that next slide. I can walk through this timeline really quick, and it's actually very similar and matches up with the timeline that Jess presented recently. The key kind of spin that the technical assistance team puts on this timeline is that we are currently hosting technical assistance intake calls where we really just want to learn the basics about what your which grant types you're interested in, what your project or planning area would be, and what type of technical assistance you may want or need. We're currently scheduling those calls. Some of you have had those calls already with our team. In April, so next month, we will be hosting kickoff calls, which are kind of a larger follow-up conversation in which you will be paired with a specified technical assistance provider that will be your main point of contact for the rest of the application period. So those kickoff calls will be scheduled in early April in most cases, and we look forward to connecting with you all, and that's really when we can start providing that more detailed and specialized support. The rest of the timeline will depend on each applicant's circumstances. We'll provide some more information on that, as well as a kind of template work plan or a default work plan with more details on the timeline, but we'll essentially build that based on the overall round 5 timeline, including the pre-proposal deadline for the implementation grant, the overall application deadline, and then, as Jess mentioned, the round 5 awards will be announced in December. So moving on to that next slide, we can see the structure of our technical assistance team. And as I mentioned, I'm with Estolano Advisors. So we are the lead technical assistance provider and kind of the lead coordinator for the whole team. But there are actually 2 other organizations that will also serve as main points of contact for some of you. Those of you who have had intake calls already may have met with folks or who were involved in round 4 may have met with these folks already. Arup, which is an engineering firm that has a lot of technical capabilities, and then CivicWell, which is a nonprofit organization that also has experience with tribal communities. Estolano Advisors, on the other hand, has a lot of experience with workforce development strategies. So really depending on your prior experience and your specific needs, We will pair you with one of those 3 firms as your main point of contact, and it will actually be an individual from one of those firms that will be your main point of contact. But our 3 organizations are also supported by 5 sort of subject matter experts, including enterprise community partners, which helps with housing, specifically in an urban context and in relation to the AHSC program. We have CDRG, Community Development Resources Group, which leads our greenhouse gas quantification services, California Relief, which provides specialized advisory services on the urban greening strategy and overall kind of forestry and urban greening policies. And then Farallon Strategies, which helps kind of tie the TCC program in with other grant types and with climate policy more broadly. And then last but not least is California Coalition for Rural Housing. So I will pass it over to Clancy to talk a bit more about their role in the TCC technical assistance process.
There we go. Thank you so much, Riley. So I'm Clancy Taylor with the California Coalition for Rural Housing. We focus on farm worker, rural, and tribe communities throughout the state. And with this program, we kind of view Estolano, Arup, and Civic Well, they're the quarterbacks, and we're the supporting team specializing in that housing piece and incorporating all of that into your application. So happy to work with some of y'all this round. Looking forward to it. Thank you, Riley.
And with that, I will pass it over to my colleague Anna from Estolano Advisors to walk through the TA process in more detail.
Great, thank you, Riley. So yes, I'll be going over the technical assistance process, going through some of the steps and what that kind of looked like from now until the application deadline. So this first step is really, as Jess mentioned, is really filling out that application initiation form. And again, this form is just to express your interest in the TCC program. It is not a commitment to apply, but just for us to kind of get to know who's interested, and for the TA team specifically to start reaching out to you all to go into the process of taking an intake call, which is described in step 2, to schedule this, where we will review your form responses, go over eligibility requirements, go over the different project and activities eligibilities, as well as any TA needs that each applicant may have. And after that, for step 3, once we do the intake call, once we get to know a little bit more about what your interests are, maybe what grant application you're going for, all eligible applicants who are eligible to receive TA will then be matched with a TA provider. And again, as Riley showed, we have 3 TA lead providers, which is Arup, Estolano Advisors, and Civic Well. So you'll be matched with one of those, who will be leading the check-in meetings, will be reviewing any applications, be working with you to provide any specific technical assistance needs, as well as other services as needed from the intake process, all the way through the application deadline. And then we go to the next slide. So once you are matched with a TA provider, and again, we take the responses from the initiation form as well as the intake call, you will be reached out by that TA lead provider to schedule a kickoff call, either late March, most likely going into early April, to discuss the proposal requirements, again, reviewing the application materials, what is required for the different application components, ensuring you meet eligibility requirements, going over the application timeline and TA priorities. We will review some of the protocols that we have set in process throughout the application period, such as any questions you may have and how we go over that Q&A process, and as well as a low TA provider opportunity, which we will dive into more details in a bit. And then after that kickoff meeting, you're going to really work with your TA provider and also the subject matter TA providers, depending on what projects, activities you are incorporating into your proposal, until the August 1st proposal deadline. And again, TA will look very different depending on applicants' needs. And we'll go to the next slide. So here you'll see an overview of some of the technical assistance services that we provide. Again, this is some of them. This does not encompass the full a list of services, but here's just at a glance. We help with any guidelines clarification. So you have any questions on the guidelines, alignment with and integration within the projects, reviewing eligibility requirements and readiness specifically for the implementation grant. GHG quantification, and again, you'd be working with the GHG provider with this, and again, this is only applicable to implementation grant. But other services include GIS mapping assistance for the project or planning area, partnerships engagement, and the transformative elements review. So with that, we can go to the next slide. In addition, you will work with your TA provider on a work plan. So the TA provider will give each applicant team a work plan template. And this work plan template is really designed to help applicant teams identify specific tasks, deadlines, and who is the responsible party for each task. Kind of to be able to guide the process of ensuring that we're getting all the application materials needed, required for the full proposal. And so the applicant team will be responsible to populate this template and submit an individualized work plan to the TA provider. And again, once you meet with your TA provider, you can work with them to really go over this in more detail. And so with that, I'll pass it back to Riley.
Thank you, Anna. And moving on to the, or actually staying on this slide here, the GHG emission reduction quantification. As a reminder, this is only for implementation grant applicants, but it's a very important process for the implementation grant application. And it is one of the reasons that we require, that TCC rather requires all implementation grant applicants to work with our technical assistance team to make sure the calculations are all consistent with one another. So the process for the GHG emission reduction quantification is that our team, and specifically your lead TA provider, again, one of the three organizations, Estolano Advisors, CivicWell, or Arab, that organization, that lead, along with CDRG, our GHG specialist, they will work together to provide you with a GHG intake form, which will which then you can fill out with inputs based on each quantifiable project. And those inputs are going to be things that relate to that specific project. So if it's a transit project, for example, it will be things like, what is the existing service? For housing, it might be might involve, the number of units, the type of units, and so on. And then the applicant will complete that intake form, and then by doing so, CDRG will be able to create a preliminary profile of the GHG emission reductions. And so then, every round, every application, things sort of change and become clarified, in some cases modified over the application process. So when any changes happen, let's say you're working with a housing developer on a housing project, and the development changes, the number of units are increased or reduced, you would just need to make sure you're updating that intake form as soon as possible, because then CDRG can update that GHG profile accordingly. We can provide more information on that during those kickoff calls in April, but just wanted to walk through that process in a bit more detail and note that it is very important to provide that, that documentation that we will request. So moving on to the next slide, we also wanted to note there is a additional sort of unique opportunity to actually receive additional technical assistance from a local organization of your choice, provided they fulfill SGC's requirements for those organizations. So basically, SGC provides some funding for local community-based organization TA providers. And those local organizations, if brought onto the team, they can actually provide more detailed and kind of more extensive technical assistance than our team can provide, just due to our need to help folks throughout the state. So in addition to helping with administrative coordination and partnership development, which our team will also help with, a local TA provider can help with actual facilitation and community engagement. So facilitating meetings, helping to engage stakeholders, particularly for kind of finalizing that community vision and developing some of the details of your narrative. And then a local TA provider can also provide actual grant writing services, so they can actually help to draft the application. We're working throughout the state. We don't have knowledge, detailed knowledge of every single community in California. So, but a local TA provider might have some of that specialized knowledge, and they might also be able to help identify key stakeholders in the community to help ensure that the whole community is being represented and is being able to kind of express a unified and complete vision. So if we move on to the next slide, we can talk through the criteria for these local TA providers. They do need to be a nonprofit entity, ideally a grassroots community-based organization. And if it is a nonprofit organization that's very active in the community, there may be some room for fitting in a larger nonprofit there, but it would need to be one that does have really direct ties with the community, and one that is is an expert and very active within the project or planning area, with experience working with some of the priority populations, including low-income communities, communities of color, and otherwise under-resourced communities in that project or planning area. And then I'd say the most important thing, the one thing you should remember when thinking about a local TA provider possibility, is that they cannot actually be applying for the grant itself. So they cannot be part of the applicant team. They should be an organization that maybe is not ready to commit to a full grant cycle, but wants to help obtain those funds for the community. So for example, if you're applying for an implementation grant and you have a local organization that is not sure what they would necessarily want to implement or work on for a 5-year grant period, but they do want to help, then they could receive some funding upfront to help with the grant writing, help with the stakeholder engagement and identification and so on. So moving on to the next slide. As far as the selection for this, we will present this criteria in the kickoff call and potentially sooner than the kickoff call, depending on SGC's internal processes, but we will provide that criteria in the next week or two, which will kind of walk through everything I mentioned just now in more detail. And again, the local TA provider cannot be part of the actual applicant team itself. It would need to be another organization. And the next step will be we provide that criteria. If you identify an organization, you will want to let your lead TA provider know. So one of those 3 organizations that we pair you with for the kickoff call, let us know about that local TA provider. You can send the information that we request, and then SGC and the TA team will approve that local TA provider. So moving on to the next slide, just to wrap everything up. Again, my name is Riley. My colleagues that just spoke are Anna and Clancy. You can feel free to email us if you have any questions, but the quickest way to reach us in most cases is actually to fill out that application initiation form so you can speak to one of our team members directly. We also have Clancy's colleague, Kate, I don't believe is on the line today, but is also helping us and is a really great resource for all things rural housing. And I also recommend going to the technical assistance website on the TCC website. And so with that, I will turn it back over to SGC. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Riley. Thank you, Anna. Clancy, for your presentation and your information. Thanks so much. Yeah, also noting that application, and it was dropped in the chat, but that application initiation form is required for all applicants, regardless if y'all qualify for TA or not. Just noting that as well. Cool. With that said, We would like to now toss the mic. Yeah, let's toss the mic over to our recent round 4 planning grantee from a disadvantaged unincorporated community. Murtaza Baksamusa is on the line with the Office of Sustainability and Environmental Justice with the County of San Diego. Murtaza will be discussing the Spring Valley Seed TCC planning project. Murtaza, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jerry. So excited to be here. Good afternoon, everybody. As Jerry said, my name is Murtaza Baksamusa with the County of San Diego. And SGC asked me to talk about, from a high-level perspective, our proposal and our experiences as a first-time applicant, challenges, and how the technical assistance helped us in overcoming them. So that next, really talk a little bit about our office. Next slide. It was formed very recently during the last 2 years, the Office of Sustainability and Environmental Justice. And part of the charge of this office is to identify environmental justice communities in the unincorporated communities. As we went and scanned the landscape of CBOs, what we realized very quickly was a limitation in terms of capacity of nonprofits to engage in these kind of issues. So we found this planning grant to be really timely and very helpful in order to meet what our very new office was set out to do. So in terms of identification of these communities. Next, we looked at Spring Valley because there were considerable amount of needs there in terms of, and I will just quickly go through some of the pictures here. You'll see that this is a park, but although this has park deficit of almost 90% of census tracts do not have parks. So it will be hard for somebody to find a park. Next, this is vacant lots, 15% less of tree canopy. So it becomes severely hot during the summers. Some of the areas have asphalt. It's hard to walk. Next. This shows this is one of the main thoroughfares. A little bit in certain areas of this Spring Valley, there's particulate matter 2.5 of 95 percentile or higher, and high concentration of ozone. So next, what we looked at was the EJ mapping of our unincorporated areas. These are 5 areas, and Spring Valley is in pink in the middle. And what we utilized in this application process was the self-identified DUC with localized data. This is, I think, the first time that SGC allow this kind of application. So we were kind of the first ones to utilize this criteria. And we tried to do a little bit of scanning in terms of getting pre-approval with DUC, AB 1550 census tracts. And some of the criteria we used were localized data of how these particular communities are dealing with environmental justice issues. Just next slide. One of the mapping tools that we used on our end, this is something developed by our office, was a story map, a combination of story map and a web map that allowed communities to look at what these kind of environmental justice indicators were. But I also want to mention that as we got into the application process, that's where the technical assistance was very helpful. It was a simple process. We just had to fill out an application form. We were matched up with Estolano Advisors. And during that process, getting the maps right was kind of critical in our application process. Next. This is some brief overview. We tried to meet some of the key objectives of the TCC program, which were GHG reduction, improving public health and environmental benefits, expanding economic opportunity, and shared prosperity. And I'll show some of the key ways in which we try to do that next. In terms of the transformational elements, next slide. Okay, so previous one. So some of the ways we tried to do that were establishing a feasibility study for a community land trust, an assessment of first and last mile audits for non-transportation modes, so bike and walk, food systems programming in community-based kitchen, and assessment of potential to open a federally qualified health center, and business community connections, particularly the small businesses in Spring Valley. Those were some of the ways in which we tried to address the transformational elements. And with that, next slide, that's my contact information and our website. I hope that provides you a big picture overview.
Yes, thank you so much. That was really helpful. I have one question I think that would be beneficial for everyone, but if you had to give one piece of advice to people who are applying for a TCC grant, what would that be?
It's the relationship with the community groups. I think that's kind of critical, especially as a government agency that we're going into the community, that building up of relationship and then maintaining it. I think that was the key kind of ingredient that is here, that has brought us this far, and we hope that we'll be successful in actually doing the work.
Thank you for that. I agree that we really try to push on that collaboration in securing those regional goals. So thanks so much for sharing your experience, and you will be available for some breakout room Q&A, right? Awesome.
Yes. Thank you, Jess.
Great. Thank you. So before we go into breakout rooms, I did want to clarify some next steps. So as we've been mentioning over and over, please fill out the application and initiation form, regardless if you qualify for TA or not. This is required for all applicants. And once again, it is not a commitment to apply. So March 31st is the due date for implementation grant applicants, and July 3rd is that due date for planning and project development grant applicants. And then we also have TCC application office hours every Tuesday, 2 to 4 p.m. And I will send more information in a follow-up email. So I will open up the breakout rooms now and stop sharing. So you will have the chance to jump into any room that you want. So one room will be for the County of San Diego, and the other room will be for technical assistance if you would like to talk to CCRH and Estolano. And then if you want to, you can stay in this main room and ask questions to the TCC team. For more specific questions, I do encourage you to go to the technical assistance room, but if they are high-level general questions, then this general room for the TCC staff would be best for y'all. So if you're interested, feel free to hop into either of those rooms. And also, if you're having trouble hopping into a room, let me know, and I can also just assign you myself. Awesome. And looks like folks are trickling in and out. So just wanted to open up this space to see if you all have any questions for the TCC staff. And I'll actually stop recording now.